You know I've been around and doing it, but now it's my time to shine and start proving it. I'm losing it, I'm moving it. The city is where I'm made, Bostonian flow, I kick it back there. Yeah, I got game, got in a fan way. We the city of the champs, every sport we play. Spit wetter than the harbor, yeah, I'm flowing like the Charles. I be speeding on this beat, call it Turnpike Miles. Yeah, it's Google signing on, John to the Hancock, and I'm always key, I'm ready to unlock. I be doing big things.
Welcome back, everyone, to the newest edition of Once a Week. I'm Billy Jan Ludis, and guys, I hope you have seen our guests before. We've put out 2 great messages, but now we're trying to partner on something that really creates an impact, truthfully, across the country, and you never know, someday the world. We want to help schools, colleges, high schools, middle schools for that matter, because we're seeing the need in so many school systems. But guys, to tell you about our guest today, he is an inspiring, impactful speaker who has already created a name for himself in the school systems across the country. But today we're going to teach you so much more. But guys, I give you Jack Sernett. Jack, tell them a little bit more about yourself. I thank you for being here, brother.
Yeah, Billy, I appreciate it, dude. For those who have seen me before, this might be a little repeat, but essentially, I'm a school speaker, and I go around middle schools, high schools, colleges, and 2 main goals is destigmatize mental health for these students, improve the mental health for these students, I guess 3 technically, and then teach these kids how to become more resilient, how to achieve post-traumatic growth, how to deal with adversity, the stuff that all of us will obviously face. But those are it. It's all about mental health, adversity / resilience. I've had a lot of firsthand experience, as we've talked about over the last couple appearances on here. A little basic rundown is over 800 days in the hospital, 22 surgeries. I've overcome eating disorders, mental health challenges myself, and kind of seen what it's like to live a life as a student at the bottom and just struggling to get by. And then now being an adult and being the polar opposite, a complete 180 transition. Yeah. I'm enlightened, as they say. I can see the light now, and basically teaching these kids and talking to these students and staff for that matter about things I wish I knew when I was their age and what's worked well for me, what's worked well for my clients, my past audiences. It's all about just serving and bringing value, obviously. But yeah, those 3 main goals are that destigmatizing mental health. How can we help these students improve their mental health? And then how can we make them more resilient? How can we build up their resiliency for life, as you say,
Right. No, that's perfect. And for new listeners, you can go back into the Once a Week YouTube archives and you can type in post-traumatic growth. That was our first time ever having Jack on. That's a great, impactful message. But truthfully, Jack, I think the last time we had you on, you and I were able to really create a positive message to directly impact schools and show everyone the need that's out there for these students. Everything you and I try and impact when we go to an auditorium, when we go to an audience of high schoolers or college students. I know you've stepped into the middle school game too and really started early. But for people to grasp right now, we are finding a need. Jack and I both have talked to guidance counselors. We've talked to principals. We've talked to students themselves. We've talked to parents. We've talked to everyone in the student faculty. And what we're finding is that because of the curriculum and being the push of, hey, we got to get this done. We only have 180 days, maybe a little bit more based on snow days. But the students then start to suffer because there's none of the personal development time or the one-on-one time with the teachers that helped Jack, you and me. We grew up where our teachers could actually give us individual time. But because of the push right now and the rate at which these kids have to learn, a lot of kids are falling behind. And that's where the mental health aspect starts to rise because the stress is there. The anxiety is there. I have to spend all this time studying to make sure I can pass this test and just get to the next grade. And that's great to really put effort in. But at the same time, for one student that might pass the grade and pass the class, there's a lot of students that face the mental health walls, the barriers, and they're like, I'm not even going to bother. And they stop. And so for people right now, go check out our last message where Jack and I talk about that in a deeper way, because that's the foundation for every time we have Jack on right now. We want to build this opportunity for schools to see, oh, wait, this is what Billy and Jack do. But for today, we want to show everyone what the return on investment of having us come in and help students is. But really, not even just, I don't want to use the term investment in this. I just want to show everyone the positive impact it is actually having on student lives. These kids, it doesn't like teenager for sure, but I've talked to college students I've spoken in front of and then 2 afterwards, and the testimonies that come as kids is absolutely phenomenal. But Jack, I know you've experienced that too. So let's do a little bob and back and forth right now. Tell us about some of the impacts you've seen directly from these students, whether during one of your gigs or after one of your gigs when they get to raise their hand and talk to you personally. What happens?
Yeah, so one of the more consistent things on almost every speaking gig now is all the kids in the audience will start to realize like a lot of them have this thought, and I had this thought when I was a student, like, okay, like I'm like one of the few people, one of the only people who are struggling with my anxiety or depression or perfectionism. Um, what they realize throughout the speech, especially when we start to do when I do some interaction with the students during the talk, like every single person has mental health to some degree, and already right there, that makes them feel like less shame because they realize, okay, like the athletes have it, the kids I've never talked to have it, the really smart students, the students that never really talk to anyone, like everyone has at some point or currently some level of struggle with their mental health. Obviously, as you know, it's increasing. And so right off the bat, like basically the beginning of some of my talks, I'll be like, all right, who is currently experiencing anxiety? And like 3/4 of the student body will raise their hand. That right there immediately, like people look around and you'll be like, oh my gosh, they just don't even really realize it because it's not a huge talking point. It's not like Sally and Sarah come up to each other and be like, hey, you have anxiety? I have anxiety. You know, it's not really like a common talking point.
Right.
So right there, that's one of the positives I noticed with these student bodies is like a lot of these students from all these different cliques and different kind of friend groups, they'll realize like, okay, like I am not alone. I'm not the only person. I don't need to feel shame or embarrassment because I'm not the only one who is struggling with my mental health or my emotional health or other things in life, essentially. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I think adults have a hard time being transparent with each other, especially kids and students.
Yeah.
And so that is number one. That's the one thing I've noticed just across the board. And what that does is, you know, Billy, that destigmatizes the whole subject.
Right.
Like when you start to talk about it and create a dialogue around mental health and you start to realize, you look around the gymnasium or the auditorium, like, oh my gosh, like all these people have also experienced anxiety, depression, insecurities. It brings things on a level playing field. You don't feel quite as bad about yourself, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And right there, like that's like one of the most powerful things. Even if I just like mic dropped and left,
Yes.
already that's like a huge connecting the dots moment for a lot of these students. So
Right.
yeah, that's something I've noticed, especially recently, because I'm starting to get really big on asking students. You know, I kind of break the ice with some easy questions. I'm like, all right, let's be vulnerable here, and I'll do like raise the hand kind of things or stand up type of questions.
Yep.
And it's very powerful when you can see an entire student body start to participate in this stuff. And anyways, go ahead. I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Noticed?
I love that. And you know, I think the impact right there where everyone gets to realize, one, I'm not alone in this, but two, the stigma I think a lot of us grew up with, which truthfully, probably still to this day, generation after generation will be a factor in a teenager's or a college student's life, is our first thought is that we're going to get judged. And so we have to keep everything inside. And when we keep everything inside, to an extent, certain areas of your life, keep it to yourself. But in an area of mental health and a declining mental health, where you're starting to be more negative, the best thing you can do is open up about it. So for everyone to come see you and really realize like, oh my goodness, everyone in here is raising their hand, or the majority are raising their hand right now, it allows a door to come down on us. We're like, okay, wait a second. I'm not alone in this struggle. Other people, if other people are struggling, maybe I can open up to them too. And then we can all talk about it, and it helps us all grow, collectively growing. So I think that's phenomenal. And even, you know, one thing you mentioned is talking on the mental health area, which is what you and I discuss with so many people, is mental health. Everyone has mental health, no matter what. That's a factor of humanity, for that matter, and it's a matter, I look at it, and what I teach is, it's a matter of where do you fall on a mental health scale? Because you can have an extremely positive mental health, a very healthy mental health area where you're seeing the world in a much positive light. You're communicative, you're socializing. People really love your positive energy. You bring so much to the table. And if you ask someone like that, what are they like? What's their daily life like? And they find that their routines are all in check. They find that there's structure there. They focus and actually direct their thoughts and focus to more positive areas, so it impacts them. That's a very positive mental health. What we're finding with teenagers and students and whatnot is a lot of them don't know. It's not even that they struggle with, they just don't know how to live at the top of the chart. So when I come in and talk to a school, and the beauty of this, I'll give you a testimonial of it, is I get to teach kids what the scale even looks like. And I call it the emotional guidance scale, but it's all of our mental health. And so people can choose, or where do I fall on a daily basis? And if you're at the top of the list, you're in the area of you're feeling love, joy, peace, gratitude, all these very positive emotions that start to climb you up the ladder. But then at the very bottom of the list, you have fear, grief, depression, powerlessness, struggle, stress, anxiety, worry. And, maybe people listening right now, you don't have to be a student or anything. Maybe people listening right now, a parent, teacher, just someone going about their life, heard one of those negative emotions and you're like, oh, wait a second. I experience that fear daily. I experience depression, grief, pain. And you're listening, like maybe there is a way out of it. That's what the goal of all these messages are, is to help you realize, like, oh my goodness, one, I'm not alone. Everyone struggles with this, as Jack said, but two, there's a way out. And in teaching people and students and everyone how to go about that process and climb up the ladder, you see the impact almost instantaneously, because now the light bulb turns on these students and these teachers. I've had teachers come up to me after watching the impact on the students, but telling me, Billy, I know that was for this audience, but I needed that more than anyone. That's a teacher. So it shows that everyone has a mental health area across the board. For students, everything we're talking about now, I was blessed to speak at what was called Success Fest earlier this year, in a conference where numerous speakers are there to come in, and they all brought their own workshops and whatnot. But I taught mental health, the emotional guidance scale, and it was to high school students, college students, and teachers. And a phenomenal kid walks in late, and he sees that there's one seat in the back row and there's one seat in the front row. And he walks in and he looks directly at me. I give him a smile. I'm not going to direct him where he needs to sit. And he, but you could tell he, might have been a kid that used to sit in the back row. He comes, he chooses the front row, and he looks directly at me and goes, I'm usually the kid that's sitting in the back, but I got a good feeling about this. I'm like, all right, man, let's start it up. Let's see where this goes. Go about the entire gig, teaching people really how to direct their thoughts, their words, their actions to live life at a higher level. And halfway through, this kid raises his hand and goes, Bill, I'm not going to lie to you. And he says it in front of everyone, I give this kid so much credit. Talk about confidence. He goes, I'm not going to lie to you. I fall in a very negative area to everything we talk about that you've brought up today. I'm very depressed usually. And he pauses and he goes, but I just can't compete with your optimism. Everything you said hit so home for me, and I understand there's so much power to this. And the beauty of that is that wasn't a one-on-one conversation. That was in front of college students, this kid's peers in high school. That was in front of all of his teachers and whatnot at Success Fest. And then that started a chain effect where the college students then raise their hand, and they're like, nah, everyone needs to understand like what this guy talks about. It hits home. We need this now more than ever. And then teachers got involved. So it's exactly what Jack said. There's an effect that happens, domino effect, where people are like, wait a second, I can raise my hand too. Wait, I can participate just as we would want. But for this student, at least, it was a moment that changed his life. And I think that's the beauty of life in general. It's a series of moments that if you take the good out of them, your life then gets a little bit better. And if you take the bad out of them, you carry that bad in a bag, for that matter, with you wherever you go. But you can let that go at any moment by shifting your thoughts. So my testimony I can talk about is how these students realize, like, oh my goodness, this is more in my control than I realized. And Jack, you get to see that. I'll pass back off to you because I know you directly work with that concept.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, by the way. That's really good. And I've noticed similar stuff. And I was just thinking, for any like specific testimonials, I know you brought up testimonials. I'm sure you've got some on your website. I think I would encourage them to go do that. Check out the website. You can probably put it in the show notes. And then also on mine, there's more videos, actual video testimonials. But yeah, no, I've noticed the same exact thing. One of the interesting things, I talked about how these students start to, like, the light bulb goes off in their head, and like they have a lot more in their control, and they're not the only one who struggles with mental health. We all have different levels, to your point, and our habits and our actions will dictate those levels. Another thing I've noticed at least my last 6 to 7 speaking gigs at these high schools and also colleges, I did a couple of colleges over the summer. Mm-hmm. The schools have a lot of things in place to help these students, but the students don't realize it. Like, there's not after the speeches, a lot of the students will come up to me and they'll say, like, hey, I don't really feel comfortable going to my parents. They have a lot of negative interaction when they're being vulnerable with their parents, or they tell their parents struggle with anxiety. There's a lot of the like, oh, suck it up, type of thing. Yeah, we're paying for your school. But at the same time, they finally realize through the speaking gigs that I do and through the staff kind of telling me, hey, pass along this message, there are counselors, there are programs in place that a lot of these kids don't even realize. And that can let them go to the guidance counselor, go to the mental health counselor, go to the administration office, and start to get connected and find ways that can get out of that rut they're in. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's amazing to me. It's like there's an answer to the test, but the students don't know there's an answer.
Yeah.
And that's like a huge thing that I noticed from my last handful of speaking gigs. These students, this is very broad, but they just realize, okay, there are resources that I can use that are free through the school, and some of them are not free, but most of them are. Most of these schools don't want these kids to struggle with mental health. They just don't, obviously.
Yep.
Test scores go down, life enjoyment goes down, dorm and all the other stuff, drama starts to happen. And so that's a huge one. That happens a ton from like every walk of life. These students come up to me and they're like, okay, like I feel better because I know there's a place I can go that I can get some answers from or start to work on things, as opposed to just hitting my head against the wall and not having anyone to talk to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's a big one for sure. I think there was one other, I can't remember. I lost my train of thought. I was thinking about it when you were talking. I'll think of it again. But that's another huge one, is like students realizing that like a lot of these, even middle schools, they have counselors there. They have people who can help you.
Yeah.
I think for me, what is I have to my advantage is, especially with middle schools and high schools, this is still kind of with college students I've noticed, but sometimes I'll put up my resume, so to speak, and it looks like I would have no reason to have mental health struggles. When I was in high school, I was Sweetheart King. I was a varsity captain of sports teams. I was, pretty popular. From the outside looking in, I had nothing really wrong on paper, but deep down off the resume, I had all these things internally I was struggling with. And that kind of just painted the picture. In college, I was in a huge fraternity. I was a competitive CrossFit athlete. My big bro was the student body president at San Diego State. Like, there's all these things that I had going for me. But underneath that, so you can't always judge a book by its cover. And I think that's fascinating for a lot of these students too, is I know one of the schools I spoke at, they brought me in after the varsity quarterback committed suicide.
Wow.
And already, before I even said my first word for the speaking gig, a lot of the staff and the students, they had this moment of like, all right, if this can happen to the varsity quarterback, this guy's like homecoming king, we all can start to work on this stuff.
Right.
And that's where, to your point, I'm sure you touch on this too, these students and these staff starts to realize, like, when you can improve and find tools, tactics, methods that work for you through our speaking gigs, but also when they go seek out help on a regular basis, once we leave the building,
right?
Once they improve the stuff between their ears, everything else in their life improves. And we talked about this last podcast. That's the biggest thing a lot of these students notice too, particularly afterwards. I'll get staff who message me and like just morale is higher, connectedness is higher. I don't have necessarily a lot of like test score examples that go up, but as you know, Billy, and as a lot of people can probably connect the dots and realize, like, once you start to get the stuff between your ears dialed in, as they say,
right,
everything starts to improve. You become a better friend, a better student, a better son or daughter. You become better at everything. And it's because you're with your own mental health, you're with your brain 24/7, as you know. I know for me, I sometimes will have branch out sessions at these schools with either athletes or kids who are very high achieving, like straight A students, kind of like I was when I was in school. And there's almost this just understanding, like, okay, we have to be stressed and this needs to be miserable. And I'm like, no. Like, you don't have to suffer just to get straight A's. Like, you can still have levels of peace and joy on a daily basis while getting good grades. I think it's almost like some people just assume, I'm just going to get old and in pain and just have a stressful adult. It's almost like that kind of community assumption.
Right.
And I think in a lot of these schools, at least that I've spoken to, a lot of these higher level students or straight A students or athletes, they just like, it's just par for the course. We're all just going to have like depression. And like, no.
Yeah.
That does not need to be the case. And that's another big one. I think I just threw out like 2 or 3 there, but
no, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. No, and as a lot that you talked on that we should branch off of. And one, just to collectively say it, there's so many areas that individually we all overlook, and it could be our own lives, but these students overlook, as you said, resources. The beauty of having a different part of the schedule, like a gig or a speaker coming in and talking, is that it shakes the entire system. Because the normal day-to-day, like I sit there way back in high school, maybe 1-2 speakers my 4 years of high school, probably one if I really had to put a number on it. And I'm sitting there.
I had to.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I can specifically remember what that guy talked about on stage because it was so different. You actually get out of your seat, go to the auditorium, sit in there. You're changing up this entire kid's perspective on how the day goes. And I study human behavior as a daily factor. That's what I bring to my coaching clients. So in talking about human behavior, when you change something, you're more apt to remember the impact and take an impact from it because it's a different moment. It's not the same. Get up at 5, get to the bus, get to this stuff, have my lunch at this exact time, go to this. You start to change the daily factor of these students.
Would you say it's like a pattern interruption?
Yes, 100%.
That's what I've noticed is it's a complete pattern interruption.
Right.
And as you know, I'm sure there's things people do on a daily basis for that really helps kind of break some of their default self-sabotage. But yeah, at the very least, it's a pattern interruption. I know I went to a big 2,000 plus person high school. We had 2 speakers in my 4 years there. It was a group of speakers come in and talk about HIV and AIDS. And so I learned a lot about health in that regard. And then a group of speakers come in and talk about drunk driving and driving without a seatbelt. And I remember those so clearly because they're the only 2. But it was also a day where, we have like 90 minutes blocked off that's different. And so we've got this huge pattern interruption with these people coming in. Yeah. And honestly, this might sound bad, but even if a couple of them weren't that great, but just because it was a different change of pace and the message was not the same, just crap every single day that we're getting from classes. Not that it's crap, but you know what I mean? It was new information. For sure. It didn't really matter how poor they were at presenting. The information was memorable. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And so, yes, that's a great example to your point. At the very least, I mean, you and I, it's a pattern interruption for positive change.
Exactly. No, 100%. And to build on the other point you made when you were talking earlier, with my background, I got to work with the high school students directly. So I was a therapeutic mentor for 7 years, working with kids, but also working with them and their families. So I got the in-home aspect with that. And there were so many kids in these one-on-one sessions that we'd have that would come in with the look of depression on their face. And they would head down, just not want to talk, everything.
Slouched.
And 100%, like any listener right now, if I told you, picture a depressed person, all of us will have some similarity between what we put on that list. As Jack just said, slouched over, head down, they're having the affect on them is really low. So I had these students that would come into these sessions and they'd be really low. And so as Jack just said, pattern interrupt. And, I would sit there and I would just do something completely random that is not to be thought of. Like this one kid was so depressed and, so I got to take them out to the community. So we're driving. And I'm just letting it happen, letting it sit. Because I'm like, all right, I'm going to let this get to a point and then I'm going to completely come around and change it. And it's just a form of therapy. And so this kid just getting lower and you can tell they're waiting for me to ask the question. I'm like, I'm not going to. I want to see where they take this to see what their normal routine is. And so we eventually get to the park we're going to play basketball or something. And, instead of me speaking in my own voice, I just started quoting Shrek and Don, and the kid just like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, hey, you want to talk? What's going on? And like, why did you do that? I was like, because how you were looking to have this conversation was a very different standpoint than what we could have. You experiencing joy, you experiencing depression is literally a moment by moment basis that you can choose. And if we're going to focus on all that negativity, we're going to experience that negativity. But if I come in with comedy, pattern interrupt, they can be like, oh, wait a second, I'm here. I'm more present in this moment so I can make a better decision in this moment. All that to say, these students do not realize that there's an option out there where, as Jack said, wait, I don't have to be depressed my entire life. Like, no, you don't. You don't. You can change this in a matter of a moment. And just the example of having a speaker come in, whatever someone talks on, you had speakers come in and talk about HIV and drunk driving. I had someone come in who, he's a paraplegic. His entire story was very impactful, inspirational, him really creating himself again. That's a life moment. That's a life example, not, all right, today on the math test, we're going to go over X, Y, and Z, or today in English, we're going to talk about this, or history, we're talking about George Washington. Whatever it is on the sun that we learn in the normal curriculum, yes, you need to have that to an extent. But as you and I, guys, go check out the last podcast with Jack, because this was a basis of it, life skills. To actually learn that there's a world outside the 4 walls of this school, but there's also a world outside the walls of your own mind. And you can then shift it by sitting there and thinking differently or experiencing something differently. That's the beauty of having a speaker come in for these school systems, because it changes it. It's a pattern effect, as Jack touched on. But it creates such a long-lasting impact when a student, because this is all individualized at that point, when a student wants to take it. That's why I wanted to get on this podcast today, because a lot of students will come to the, I can remember it, numerous people. There's a lot of students that will sit there and they'll want to joke around in the auditorium. They'll want to, and they're, that's their choice. But the beauty of having Jack or myself in there is like, I make it a point to, I'm not going to necessarily call people out, but I say at the start of every gig, this is their decision. What we're about to go over can completely change your life if you take it and run with it. If you don't, you leave it here. Autopilot can take you wherever it will. But now it's a moment of these students realizing, like, wait a second, adulthood skills, transition to adulthood skills, everything we want these students to learn on a mental health level, but on a life level, I then can take hold of this information, apply it in the way that I should and can. And wait a second, my life starts to look different. My thoughts start to look different. My words start to look different. My actions are different. You're climbing yourself up the ladder I mentioned earlier. Now, Jack, with you talking to schools and whatnot, have you seen that firsthand where students take hold of it? You mentioned the resources, where students are like, wait a second, there's options to help me? Yeah, let's go there. How have you seen kids actually take hold of it?
Yeah, I joked. I didn't joke. A staff member, I think it was, it was my second or third gig when I moved back here to Kansas City. He said he kind of visualized, when he looked out at the audience, he could basically see light bulbs on top of the students' heads. And it's not like I'm all knowing or you're all knowing and we give all the answers to all the mental health struggles in the world. But what we do, there you go, makes sense, is we provide that clarity and an aha moment for a lot of these students. And the one thing I've noticed is a lot of students, they learn where and how and why it's so important to ask for help. And there are these things that you can do, to your point, to get out of it. And I think you and I have an advantage from the get-go because we are like a walking pattern interruption. I think a lot of these students are so used to seeing the same adults every single day, parents, coaches, and teachers. Some of these schools have amazing parents, coaches, and teachers, but it's the same people. When you walk in with your just stunning beard and your very Boston name, and I walk in 6'5", just covered in tattoos, already there's a tension right there. And then it's up to us, obviously, to deliver on that. And what we talk about is stuff that some of these students have heard, but a lot of it they don't hear because it's not the same math, science, geography, history. And as a result, I have noticed, like you said, is a lot of these students all of a sudden have the courage to ask for help. And they realize it's not a sign of weakness. Especially, I would say most of the breakout sessions I do outside of these main speaking gigs are with boy teams or male athlete teams, and a lot of those alpha males type of mentalities. I think the biggest weak sauce thing that they start to realize is it's extremely weak to lie and not be honest, especially with yourself. And what our speaking gigs do, what I do when I go into school, what we would do when we come to schools is we open up that dialogue and help these students realize, even with a lot of the females in the audience or ladies in the audience, asking for help is not giving up, it's refusing to give up. And it's not a sign of weakness to be vulnerable and admit where you need to improve. And for some people, that's not even the barrier to entry. For some of these students, they'll come up to me and they'll realize gosh, I guess I am struggling a little bit more with this, but now I know where to go for it. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Obviously, you and I give them tangible things to do, things that have worked for us, things that we know work with our clients. But at the same time, we can help them realize you can go from here to here. You don't always need to be stuck here. And this is their own words. I know my selfishly favorite part of speaking gigs is afterwards seeing the line of students that want to come up and talk to me. And it's not the same type of student. It's a little bit of everything. If you can kind of picture that, especially at a big public school or a big college or just a big audience, there are a little bit of everything in that line. It's not just a bunch of bros that want to talk about lifting weight. You know what I'm saying? And that is the coolest part to me. And I was honestly surprised by that. I know when I first started doing speaking gigs at these schools, I'm not sure how you felt, Billy, on your end, but I'm I might connect with a couple of the dudes and, I think a lot of people kind of just check out. I've always been amazed, even as I sucked in the beginning, and I've gotten better, obviously, as the speeches have gone on, how all these different types of students will come up and get value from it and start to connect the dots and realize hey, they can improve their own life. You know what I'm saying? And that's the coolest part. Even at an all boys private school I spoke to back in California, there's all different types of boys out there at this school. It wasn't just a bunch of athletes. You know what I'm saying? And so that to me was the coolest part for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a great point, where the individualism of everyone today, every single age, you are yourself. And so the different types of students, boys, girls, in this day and age, you have an opportunity to be creative with who you are. You could be, an emo kid. You could be a jock. You could be whatever the old terminology. I don't think we use those words anymore,
whatever the
right?
terms are. I don't like
whatever
to
they are now,
but they're
right?
You know what I mean.
For sure. It's what we grew up with, but having us come in allows these students to connect with someone else. And to your major point, students are seeing the same people every single day. And
they're hearing the same things.
They're doing the same things. Everything's the same. That's not to fault, as you said, it's not to fault great teachers. It's not to fault great coaches, principals, guidance counselors, everyone under the sun, great parents. It's not to fault that by any means. But to have someone else come in that they can then connect to, because, to really emphasize this point, most kids today feel like outsiders. So to have an outsider come into the building and create a positive message, you then create a connection to this kid and wherever he wants his future to go, because you have two, at least in this moment, two speakers that created where they can take their future. By doing it, by stepping out of the norm, you might have all these kids that are trying to step out of the norm, hence why they're doing whatever they do or getting creative with who they are. That's the beauty of having someone else come in, and as I think this will be the title of this entire episode is the pattern interrupt, because that's what this is.
Yeah.
But that's such a positive impact with students. Go on.
Let me ask you, I'm curious. So I know you gave an example of when you took that student out and you used humor essentially to kind of pattern interrupt. I know for me as a speaker, and I know this falls in line with you too. Like the coolest thing is when students like not only laugh, they might have cried a little bit. It wasn't just like doom and gloom.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. It's like, it's very easy to talk about mental health to these students. And some of these subjects we talk about can be very kind of dark if we let it be.
For sure.
My huge goal every time is like we throw in pattern eruptions throughout the speaking gigs. I know something I've done recently is I'll ask questions throughout the speech, and I'll have a student who's courageous enough to raise their hand. I got a little tennis ball with a gift card wrapped around it, and I'll throw that tennis ball to them. If they catch it, the crowd goes crazy. If they drop it, I go down and do 10 push-ups. Like little things like that just breaks the ice essentially, as opposed to just me sitting up there like a dictator with a microphone and telling these kids, do this, do that. There's a lot of that crowd interaction, which is the best part, because it's very easy for you and I, Billy, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, to make this doom and gloom the whole time. And that's the coolest part with that. And I don't know, I think this would be powerful for people to listen to this who are particular parents or people who work at schools. I know that I do follow up with the schools. And one of the coolest things that I noticed, this doesn't happen for every school, I'm not going to sit here and lie, but a handful of the schools, I'd say over half the schools I talk to, afterwards, a month down the line, 2 months down the line, they see a gigantic uptick in the students who are sign up for sessions with the guidance counselor or with every school has a little bit of a different kind of term or title. I know here in Kansas City, all the middle schools now have a social worker or like a mental health therapist.
Right. And
the numbers are just skyrocketing. These staff members like run out of room on their schedule. And not that like exciting, like, oh yes, all these kids are struggling. No. They're reaching out for help and they're getting the help that they need. And that to me is really cool when I follow up with these middle schools, high schools, and colleges to hear that. Because a lot of these students, they're not going to remember everything we say, but they remember like how we made them feel, Right. And part of that is getting them to realize like, hey, there are things you can do to really improve your life. But yeah, that's what I've noticed. I'm not sure if you do a lot of follow up with schools, but I know for me, that's been like the most powerful thing on top of like afterwards with the students. Yeah. Is to see that feedback. Right. You know what I'm saying? Have you noticed the same thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. I love that. And I always try and schedule that out with, school, company, because I get this, I speak to the whole area, but it's so much fun for me to have that follow up, because then you actually see what was the impact, and they'll tell you what morale has been boosted. I actually had the, pre-effect of that for a gig I'm doing in January for a school up here in Massachusetts. In the meeting about the gig with the guidance counselors and everyone makes the decision, they said, Billy, like the line out the door for the counselors is we can't get to everyone. And so the adverse effect of everything you're saying right now is, all right, well, let's do something to give the power back to these kids. So it's not to say they don't have to go to the counselor, but it brings it back to them where they can handle it a little bit more, so they don't want to go to the counselor. You know what? I got this. I don't have to sit there and go wait in the line of 30 students trying to get to the two counselors. That's the thing. We mentioned curriculum at the start of this recording, but it's also the weight that is on the shoulders for these teachers and these counselors. And then to realize that weight gets heavier and heavier and heavier every single day, specifically because all of these students are struggling. Coming back to the topic of the day, the pattern interrupt. All right, well, let's do something that hits them a little bit closer to home so we can weed out that line. And then, because you never know. It could be the first 5 people online could just be one, sadly, high school, wanting to get out of class, But then student number 6 in that line of 10 to 20 kids needs it now more than ever.
Yeah.
Does not have the resources, tools at their disposal, and they're waiting for these 5 kids to just like, yeah, well, I just don't want to take my math class right now. You never know. That's not to say I hope I know students, they're going to do that, but I hope that's not the case, right? You go, yeah.
Yeah. On top of that, like you said, there are some students on the mental health scale. They're not all, of course, not every student, not every person is experiencing like severe depression, anxiety. Some students just take like one thing you said or one tool you helped implement during your speech, and that they take that and run with it. And they don't necessarily need to go to a counselor, but they know if they have to, that's there. And that's another thing that's fascinating. You got to be careful with, especially middle schools, high schools, and colleges. Right. I'm 29, but I'll get DMs on social media. I'll put my social media up at the end of students saying like, hey, like just this one thing right there, that was awesome to hear. That's helped me a ton. It's like sometimes the simplest thing, not always like, hey, go do these 10 sessions with your counselor. So there are obviously a large portion of students, kind of to your point, they either want to just get out of jail free card.
Right. Yeah.
Or, not every student that necessarily gets value from the speaking gig is the one who will go straight to line. Some of them do have like parents they'll go to, and the parents will help them find a counselor or a therapist. Yep. Or they just their parents are great, and all of a sudden they open up that dialogue. But I'll get a lot of DMs or messages after the speeches that are like, hey, just that simple, like one thing you talked about in the beginning, that's all I needed to hear. And I was good. Yeah. You know what I mean? So sometimes it's not like, of course, not every student is severely struggling, if that makes sense, obviously. Yes. And I know you know that, but I just want to make that clear. We're not trying to act like every kid is down in the dumps.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple points I want to make to everything you just said, but the final point right there, not every student is down in the dumps, but that's the beauty of having us even further, because there's always another level up. Always. Correct. No matter what. A student that could be on cloud 9, they're happy-go-lucky, whatever, more often than not, they're the ones that want to listen to us more because they're at a level to accept it, take it, and then run with it. A lot of these kids just want to hear it and take 1 or 2 pieces. Phenomenal. I love that. But the ones that are already pursuing, living life at a very good level and whatnot, we can say, they're trying to take it and learn as much as they can. That's not to say the honor students. That could be, you mentioned you talked to a lot of athletes and sports and whatnot. That could just be a kid on the football team that's trying to better himself, getting good grades and a good standpoint, has a good family life, good family home, everything like this. But then he hears a speaker come in and he's like on the edge of his seat. He's absorbing it. That's what I used to do. I was, I had a good upbringing. I struggled mental health for sure. But when a speaker came in, I personally was not focusing on the mental health I was at. I was sitting there, all right, what does this person bring to the table that I can take and utilize to help me forward? And that's one thing that I do with my gigs is I have everyone literally at the start of every gig identify their goals, because every single person, not just student, every single person in this entire world has goals to their life, or they've never looked at their goals and they set goals that they can change their life. So when we do that at the start of every single gig, it individualizes it, personalizes it to you. And they learn all this information we're about to go over and how to apply it directly to their personal goals to help them move forward. So you could be someone at the lower level of mental health and you could grow out of it. You could be someone at the top level just trying to be successful in whatever area. Oh, wait, I can take these tools and use them here too. So that's the beauty of reaching everyone where they're at. I know you got a point. I just want to say this last little point.
Go for it.
Nope, it's gone. It's out of my head. I'll pass it back off to you. It's literally was on the tip of my tongue. I'll pass back to you, then we'll close out because I know you only got a couple minutes to your next client.
Yeah, you're good. And you if you remember it, jump in for sure. I know to your point, I'm huge on questions. Questions pull you closer. Answers, just always giving answers to these students in the audience is push them farther away. One of the things I do too is I ask these students, like, who here has ever had something happen to them that they don't want to happen? Every kid raises their hand. So even though some of the kids in the audience, some of the students, they might be at a higher level of a mental, emotional well-being, it is a 100% chance something will happen next week, next month, next year that will maybe knock them down a couple rungs.
Right.
And so they can still take these. I'm really big on like, hey, even if you feel like you don't need this right now, I would recommend you guys still try to absorb as much as you can, because eventually you will need to use these things or these tools or these methods or come back to this example in your head. Because we're not always at the same level, as you know. And for so, sure. Yes, of course, people can go from here to here, but there are obviously some students that come in and listen to me talk and they're like chilling. Yep. But then like a year later, their mom dies and they don't know what to do. And you know what I mean? And so it's right. That's another big point to what, you know, sure. Piggyback on what you were saying is it goes both ways for sure. 100%.
And that's the beauty of reaching every kid where they're at, every person. Yes. And that's something that I guess I can piggyback because the thought came back to me. It did finally, but it works coinciding directly with what you said. Like when I talk to a school, I always, and Jack, maybe you do this too, I always put the idea out there, do 2 gigs, one me speaking to the students, and then create an event that I can speak to the parents. Because at that point, you're impacting the household where these kids now, oh my goodness, I just learned all this information to better myself. I want to go use it. Those parents might be struggling. Those parents might struggle with their anger. They might yell. They might scream. They might be completely peaceful for that matter. To teach the parents then changes another life for one. But 2, now the younger person at home and the older person at home can come together, talk about what they talked about, which allows them to both learn even further. But to apply it, you're now changing the community. You're changing one household, and then if all these students do it and then their parents do it, you're changing an entire community based off of a gig. And you're allowing people to better themselves, which changes the world. So that's something I love to bring to schools all over, because why stop it all at the student? Allow these parents to know what's actually going on in the student's mind and the student's life. And then what could also be going on, like learned behavior is a real aspect of the mind. So Absolutely. If these students learn that they're struggling with this area, and then they figure out, oh, wait a second, dad does that. Mom does that. Maybe that's where I got it from. And then they actively try and change it, but they're seeing it every single day. Now there's hurdles and walls up. Oh, wait, I have to change everything my parents did their entire life that I learned from. That's very tough for anyone in the world to do. Heck, I see that in my own family where I try and change things that my parents did because it didn't work. It impacted me. It left a pain, trauma, whatever it might be under the sun. And I said that, I was like, all right, I know I have to actively do something different. So it's a student's perspective or a young person's perspective. To have the parent then change and realize, you know what, I do this. I know I can change this thing. I don't have to always resort to yelling and screaming. Maybe I can approach things differently. That then changes the parent, which again changes the household, changes the rest of this kid's life is now different. Off of one gig that impacted the entire surrounding area and people. That's something I love bringing to the table, Jack. I don't know if you do that.
Yeah, that's huge. That's I don't do that enough. I know the only time I've really noticed that is one of the vice principals, their son was a student. And for the staff member, a lot of the staff members, I know you've talked about this, they'll be like, oh, that was huge for me. And you already gave an example a couple of times. But also one of these vice principals, as a parent, his son was in the audience and he started to connect the dots. And like, that's the only time I really noticed that. Otherwise, I haven't done enough with the parents. But I think that would be, gosh, can you imagine like an after-school event, students and parents, like together, and that just mind-blowing conversation and open dialogue and kind of like open forum. That would be, gosh, dang it. Oh,
it's impactful.
There's so much there, obviously.
Yeah, that's why I always put that out there. I know we got to close this thing out there, but I always put it out there to, and so listening, if there is a school, like listening, I always put it out there. I know Jack's about to after hearing this, but to like my gig in January is literally like, I came in, let me speak to the students, but I said, like, going over what I addressed where it's for all ages, like, hey, Billy, can we have the teachers sit on this? I'm like, of course, bring everyone, not just to spread, Billy G and everything like this. No, let's help everyone. And I think that emphasizes the point of why Jack and I put these together. It's not, again, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, it is not to spread Jack and myself as a speaker. We literally come from a place of wanting to create an impact and help people. Right. So why not help everyone? To put it out there to parents and students, but to put it out there to the staff. So now I've got schools reaching out to like, hey, could you do the professional development days that we have during the year? I was like, of course, I would gladly, because they realize the material is needed for every single age group, no matter where you are, no matter where you find yourself. And that if that's why coming to students and college students and high school students who are literally in the thick of trying to figure this world out, let's give them the tools necessary so they can get out of the thick of it and then live a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher on these higher levels where they can then experience and do what they want to do in this life and succeed at whatever they set their mind to. That's the beauty of having someone come in and help them in these areas. But Jack, I know we got to close this out for your client that's in a couple minutes, but is there any lasting message you want to leave with people right now before we close this recording out?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate what you said.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I got to be careful because I can set myself up for failure, because I would do this stuff for free, because for me it's like a selfish high from helping these students. Like it's not about like, oh, everyone look at me. This is, hey, I know this can help a student, multiple students, thousands of students in the audience, and that's the biggest thing, is like, I am of service to the people listening, and the goal, like you said, is like over deliver, bring tons of value. And for me, the main thing that I've noticed is like the big speaking gigs to the main student body, it's more broad than specific. And to your point, a lot of times, particularly at every college I've ever spoken to, they'll have me branch out into like a breakout session. And there's also tons of value in that, because you can get a little more specific with a smaller group. It's a little more close knit. Kids have a little bit more courage to raise their hand and be vulnerable. But that's like the biggest thing, is like, hey, there is a need, and you and I can help fill that need. And it's all about value and just helping these students. I think help is almost like a weak word, because it's more than that. But that's the biggest thing, is like, dollars are not, obviously we're paid professional speakers, but for me, like, what's priceless is like the value, and just see like the benefit it brings to students. That to me is like my favorite part. Like I said already, is the students coming in line, like thanking me for coming, or bonding even more and talking more. Like that to me is worth $1 million check right there. Like that is the coolest part to see, particularly if they're kids that are ones that like normally don't ever like speak up, or like, you know what I mean, or open and honest. So that is what's awesome, and that's what you and I obviously bring to the table. There's tons of opportunity that will be coming out. 2024 is gonna be crazy, Billy. It'll be good.
Exactly, right? No, it's gonna be ecstatic, incredible, ecstatic. But to that point that you just made, we're following our passion.
Yes.
And the value that we can bring to others brings a value back to ourselves, which allows us to realize, and this could be for anyone right now, when you're following your passion, you realize you're on the right path. Trust the process, have faith in the process, continue to take the action steps necessary. But Jack and myself have become real world examples of that, because we're just trying to help people. Bring value, does bring value back to us, as I said, but it allows us to realize we're doing what we're meant to do. That's finding your purpose and following your purpose wherever it may lead. And it's led us here. But Jack, I thank you for being here, brother. Tell them where they can find you. Find more about your speaking, more about I know you're on Instagram, you're on everything right now. Tell them where.
Yeah. Social media, you can just type in my name, Jack Sernett. I know Instagram is a big one I'm on, is I am Jack Sernett. Like 8 months ago, my account got hacked, so I have a new one in the last 8 months. So we're slowly leveling up there. My website is jacksernettinspires.com. Best email, I do give out an email, which can be a little dangerous, but I have an email where a lot of these times people will reach out to me, is contact@jacksernett.com. And then everyone listening, I know, Billy, you're too humble, but everyone needs to go listen to his stuff too. Reach out to Billy. His content is great. And then I'm looking forward to being back on in about a month, and we'll keep adding on to this conversation, keep the dialogue going. And eventually we will have our own testimonials together, with you and I doing a tandem speech, which would be even more exciting. So
exactly. We already know that's going to happen.
yeah, absolutely.
But I thank you for being here, brother. Guys, all those links are going to be in the credits of this video, but they're also going to be in the YouTube description. You can go right there, find Jack's website, reach out to him, ask your questions, heck, book him for a gig. As we just went over, there's so much return on investment for bringing in Jack, bringing in myself, but the impact it brings to students and the faculty and the parents for that matter, it's a whole different level. So you guys reach out to Jack, book him for your next speech, for a student, for a school, whatever age group. Jack brings so much to the table. And as he said, this is going to be a monthly thing, because there's such a need now. So why not create some sort of tool, resource, as we said earlier, that you can go to, that you can share to someone, that you can share with school. Like, these are the guys. They bring something more to the table that students are across the country right now are saying, I needed that. So why not spread the word? So lend a hand, spread Jack, spread myself, so you can create an impact in your school system, at your faculty, for your parents, for your community for that matter. That's the goal. pattern interrupt, create an impact by that pattern interrupt. Send this video to them so they can show like, oh, you know what? They're onto something here. But guys, I thank you so much for tuning into this video. Please like this message on YouTube. Hit that thumbs up on below. Share this message to someone who you feel needs to hear it, can grow with it, and can run with it. If at any point, for a point that Jack said or a point that I said, someone popped in your mind, could be a student, could be a parent, could be a teacher, could be a guidance counselor, whatever it is. If they popped in your mind, there's a clear-cut sign to you that they need to hear exactly what we talked about for themselves, for the students, for whatever it is on the sun. Share it to them, not to spread us, but to help another person. That's the goal of once a week in every single video we've ever done, is to help people. Spread the word, play a role, and lend a hand in that help. And please subscribe to Once a Week if you've not already, because that number is going up. We're closing in on 10,000 by 2024, which is huge. I didn't see that coming, but the beauty of that is that means we're helping more people. So please subscribe, become a part of it, and see our videos every week. But again, Jack, I thank you for being here, brother. Thank you so much. Guys, go to his website, check him out. If you're in need of a coach or a speaker on my end, go to BillyGLifeCoaching.com. Check out my information. You can find me. You can see all my stuff in his credits as well. But Jack, I can't wait for next week, or next month, I should say, brother. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Billy. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a good one, man.
Thank you.
You know I've been around and doing it, but now it's my time to shine and start proving it. I'm losing it, I'm moving it. The city is where I'm made, Bostonian flow, I kick it a back day. Yeah, I got game, God in a fan way. We the city of the champs, every sport we play. Spit wetter than the harbor, yeah, I'm flowing like the Charles. I be speeding on this beat, call it turnpike miles. Yeah, it's Boo signing on, John to the Hancock.